So, have you ever wondered how a major belief system manages to stay balanced in a world that's always pulling people to extremes? Well, today we're going to dive into the Maslak. That's the core methodology of the Ulama of Deoband. It's a school of thought that literally defines itself as a path of moderation. Let's see how they pull it off.
Okay, first things first, we gotta understand this word, maslak. It's an Arabic term, and it basically just means a way, a methodology, or an ideology. You can think of it as the blueprint, the how and why behind this whole school of thought. And that really gets to the heart of what we're talking about today, right? In a world that's constantly pulling us left and right, how does any belief system find and hold its center? According to our source material, this is the exact challenge that the Maslak of Deoband was designed to meet head-on. So to really get a handle on this, here's our game plan. We're going to break it all down. We'll start with the whole idea of the middle path itself. Then we'll dig into its foundation, the oneness of God. From there, we'll see how that applies to honoring sacred figures, its take on spirituality and customs, its approach to Islamic law, and finally, how it balances good old-fashioned reason with divine revelation. All right, let's jump in. First up, the Deobandi middle path. Now, the source material makes it clear that this maslak is one and the same with the original Ahle Sunnat Wal Jamaat. And that's a mouthful, but it just means the people of the prophetic way and the community. The name itself actually tells you a lot. As-Sunnah, that's the principles, the rules. You could call it the what of the faith. But then you have al-Jama'at, and that's all about the people, the community that actually follows and teaches these principles. That's the who. And the idea here, which is really crucial, is that you just can't have one without the other. A path needs people to walk it, and a community needs a path to follow. And this whole concept, it's rooted in a tradition where the Prophet Muhammad was asked which group would be on the right path. His answer, as you can see right here, was basically the ones who follow my way and my companions. So that became the blueprint, right? It merges the way, the sunnah, with the people, the jama'ah. So the main takeaway here is pretty simple. This isn't some kind of religious buffet where you can just pick and choose what you like. The middle path is all about weaving everything together, the law, the theology, the spirituality, into one single balanced whole. The entire goal is to stop any one part from overpowering all the others. So how in the world is this balance actually achieved? Well, it all starts with the absolute bedrock of Islam, the oneness of God, or Tawheed. Seriously, everything else we're going to talk about is built right on top of this one single idea. And this slide, it perfectly shows the balancing act in action. The source points out two big dangers. If you lean too far one way and exaggerate God's oneness, you risk being disrespectful to really important sacred people. But if you lean too far the other way and exaggerate your respect for those people, you risk messing with the concept of God's uniqueness. So the Deobandi path tries to walk that razor's edge, right down the middle. Okay, so if the goal is to balance God's oneness with respect for sacred figures, what does that actually look like in practice? Well, that brings us right to how prophets and saints are viewed and honored. Here we go again with that balancing act. Look, the prophets, they're seen as the absolute best of humanity. Disrespecting them is a total non-starter. It's considered disbelief. But, and this is a huge but, treating them as divine is also a firm red line. Even the Prophet Muhammad, who's held as the greatest of all creation, is always, always seen as a servant of God. And that same level of deep respect is extended to all of his companions, the Sahaba. And when it comes to any historical disagreements that happened between the companions, this quote from the text is just, wow, it's incredibly telling. The approach is to completely back off from any criticism or from taking sides. The whole feeling is, hey, we weren't there, it is not our place to judge, so we shouldn't even talk about it. It's a stance of just absolute respect and caution. All right, let's move on to another area where this balance is super important. Spirituality, or Sufism, the veneration of saints, known as awliya, and a whole bunch of cultural customs. And again, we see this really clear line being drawn. The source says loving and honoring pious people is actually part of your faith, but it draws a hard line against anything that starts to look like worship. We're talking things like prostrating at graves or making sacrifices in their name. That right there is the key difference between veneration and worship. This brings us to another really important word, bid'ah. This basically refers to a bad innovation. It's when someone invents a new religious practice and starts treating it like it was always a required part of the faith from the very beginning. And this concept is used to classify certain customs that are prohibited. Now, this table gives us a couple of really clear examples. Notice how they're classified differently.
Specific, fixed morning rituals get labeled as bid'ah or innovation because, according to the source, they're adding new duties to the religion that weren't there before. But something like an extravagant wedding custom, while it's discouraged for going against the prophetic way, is in a different box. The main difference seems to be whether a custom is just a bad habit or if it's being treated as a brand new piece of the religion itself. So we've seen how this middle path works for beliefs and customs. But what about the law? How does this philosophy of balance apply when you're talking about legal interpretation or fiqh?
A really central idea here is something called taqlid. To put it simply, it means following the established legal rulings of a super qualified classical scholar and imam instead of just trying to figure out complex legal texts all by yourself.
So, for this school of thought, following a structured legal tradition, in this case the Hanafi school, is seen as pretty much essential. The idea behind taqlid is to prevent a kind of legal free-for-all where everyone is their own expert. But it's not meant to be blind following. The source makes a point to say that research and understanding are still encouraged. And just as important, this doesn't mean they disrespect the other major legal schools. It's more about choosing one consistent framework to work within, not claiming it's the only one that exists.
And for our last big topic, we've arrived at a classic debate. What is the relationship between our own human reason, aql, and divine revelation, naql? So once again, the source lays out two extremes for us. On one side, you've got the view that human reason is the ultimate boss. If a piece of revelation doesn't make sense to your intellect, you just toss it out. On the complete other side is the view that reason is totally irrelevant, that religion is just about obedience and understanding doesn't even enter the picture.
And here it is, the middle path. The Deobandi view, as the text presents it, is that reason is the servant of revelation. It's an absolutely essential tool for understanding the divine texts, for unpacking their wisdom, but it can never ever be the master that gets to sit in judgment over them.
So to wrap this all up, the Maslak of Deoband really presents itself as a synthesis. It's trying to weave together these three massive strands: the outward rules of law, the inward journey of spirituality, and a really deep respect for tradition. And right at the center of all of it is that constant, careful search for balance. And that leaves us with one last thing to think about. For any system that's so deeply rooted in tradition, so committed to a path of moderation, the biggest question is always about application. How does a framework like this navigate the pressures, the complexities, and the insane pace of change in our modern world? That's definitely something to chew on. Thanks for joining this explainer.